In this video, I really want to talk about not overworking your lures. If there's anything that I've noticed over the years, especially with the amount of pressure that a lot of fisheries see, is that sometimes subtle lures that you don't work a whole lot can tend to outproduce baits that are aggressive. And so in this video, I really want to talk about things that you need to be aware of so that you're not overworking your baits and missing out on bass. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by my apparel company, Fin Fishing. Right now, all of my Black Friday sales are live. So basically everything on the Fin Fishing website, I mean, sun shirts, the all new duck shorts, the new hats, even like this shirt right here, which is the American Bass t-shirt, tri-blend t-shirt. This is only 16 bucks right now. Everything is 20% off except for the rod gloves, but I have a huge stock of rod gloves. But anyways, I'm gonna leave some links down below in the description. Shopping at Fin Fishing is truly the best way to help support this channel. I greatly appreciate every single one of you who has done so. Also, thank you to every single one of you who has simply watched the video. I really appreciate you as well. All right, let's talk about not overworking your lures. And this is something that, like I said, I find it's still a struggle for me. There are times where I'm out there on the water where I realize that I am overworking a bait. And this really kind of, when I talk about this, I'm really kind of talking about fishing like a lot of bottom bouncing baits, you know, whether that's a jig or Texas rig, a Ned rig, whatever it may be. This is something that you really have to kind of watch out for. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is that rod length can dictate how much action your bait has. And this is something that I didn't realize for a number of years until I visibly saw it. And what I mean by rod length is that, and I'll tell you when I really saw it, it was a number of years ago. I was fishing a Ned rig, and I used to fish a Ned rig on a 7-foot 6-inch rod. And I caught a lot of fish that way. But one day I was up in really shallow, clear water fishing for smallmouth that I could visibly see. I wasn't bed fishing, but I was more or less sight fishing. And I was using that same Ned rig rod, but what I realized is that the smallest little action of me kind of popping that bait like this really jumped that bait way farther off the bottom than I thought that I was doing, because I was using a 7-foot 6-inch rod. So for me going from here to here, kind of, you know, hopping that bait off the bottom, I mean, it was popping that bait like 3 foot off the bottom, which if you're fishing around aggressive bass, this may not matter at all. You know, it may not matter like one bit. Maybe a bass really likes that. But when you're fishing around highly pressured bass, I think that you want things to look as natural as possible. And I don't see a whole lot of crawfish in underwater videos jumping 3 foot off the bottom. And a Ned rig kind of mimics a crawfish. And so what I kind of found out is that going down to a lot shorter rod, for example, with a Ned rig now, I use like a 6'6" to 6'9" rod. 7 foot is probably the top. And that does make a difference in the, like how far off that bottom that bait is going to come. And it's something that I didn't really think about a whole lot. It's also something that I had to relearn, because a number of years ago when I was a teenager, I was fishing in a certain professional angler's boat who actually still fishes as a pro today. I was fishing the Junior National Championship down on, it was a lake in Arkansas, Lake Hamilton. And I was fishing a shaky head with a gentleman that day. He was a pro. And he's a very nice guy, but I remember he kind of yelled at me in this one moment because I was raising my bait while fishing a shaky head, and he literally told me, he's like, bro, you're jumping that thing off the bottom 3 or 4 foot. Because when I was fishing, I was dumb also, keep that in mind. But I'm fishing the shaky head, I'm twitching it, and I'm kind of popping it like this. And that simple movement, he's like, dude, that's jumping way off the bottom. And I remember in that moment, like I will never forget that moment, because he more or less lectured me about it. He's like, you're gonna get more bites keeping that thing down there closer to the bottom. And so it's kind of the same concept I had to learn years later again. But that length of the rod really can make a difference in the way that you pop and how much action that bait is going to have on the bottom. Now, with that being said, if you are casting a bottom bait and you are dragging it across the bottom, the length of your rod is not going to matter in that case. So if you are doing a lot of dragging, sure, go ahead with a long rod because it's not going to matter. But if you're kind of popping that bait off popping that bait off the bottom a lot. I'm not saying you can't use a long rod. I'm just saying you have to be aware of how much you are working that bait, because sometimes overworking a bait, it can make a really big difference. All right, the next thing that I wanted to talk about is not overworking your bait, actually not even moving your bait when you're fishing during the spawn. This is something that is so critical. And there have been a number of different lakes that I have fished over the years that you can't really see fish that are on beds, but you know that you're fishing around fish that are on beds. I mean, this happens all the time when you are fishing in Florida. I mean, from January to about May in Florida, like you could potentially be fishing around fish that are on beds in shallow water. Now, throughout other parts of the country, this time frame kind of shrinks a little bit, but you typically know when fish are on beds. And the worst thing that you can do in that situation, I have found, is to overwork your baits. A lot of times what I'm gonna do is dead stick. I love to pitch into an area where I believe there to be a bed, and I'm gonna let that bait sit there for like 30 seconds, like not moving it at all. And I've told this story before on the channel and even over on Bass Fishing HQ, but I'll never forget a couple of tournaments, a Bassmaster Open I fished on Lake Kissimmee, where I was fishing in pads and I got whooped by a co-angler, where he really laid it on me, and he kind of told me what he was doing, and it was also noticeable. He was pitching into holes in those lily pads, and I mean was not moving the bait, where I was pitching in there, bouncing it 2-3 times, pulling it out, pitching it to the next little spot. He would pitch it in there and just let that thing sit. And I'm telling you, he was culling, meaning that he was swapping out his fish in a tournament for bigger fish before I even had my first keeper. And so it was that noticeable in that tournament. So anytime you are fishing in the spawn, it's really important not to overwork a bait, work a bait too quickly. Keep it in there, don't do anything. Dead stick that bait, because you never know if that thing lands on a bed. Sometimes you will see, like I see this on beds all the time, where it hits a bed and that bass, he comes over to it and he just sits there and he watches it. And then all of a sudden, because of the natural little currents in the water, because of the way that a bait looks in the water, it just kind of slowly moves, and he just picks it up, swims off, set the hook. Really big key there. The other thing that I want to talk about when it comes to not working a bait is I think I've told this before, but a number of years ago, and this is, again, you always like relearn these things as anglers that you feel like you should know. But a number of years ago, this was back in 2012, I took my best friend and my uncle fishing on Lake St. Clair. And we were all fishing the exact same drop shot bait on Lake St. Clair, trying to catch smallmouth. Now, this was in October of the year, so the water was a little bit colder, but I was fishing this drop shot where I was casting the bait out. We were kind of fishing a small drop from about 7 foot to about 9 foot of water. We were fishing this really small drop, and I was casting that drop shot out there and just dragging it across the bottom, not popping it at all. And I caught I think 6 bass that day. I can't remember. I remember I caught like 5 or 6 times as many bass. They both caught 1 fish a piece, and I caught like 6 bass that day. And they were both aggressively working that bait. Okay, they were both down there popping it, kind of the way that you learn a lot of times about fishing a drop shot. And I actually, the only reason that I was casting out and dragging that is because I was whooped like a year or 2 prior to that, actually about 3 years prior to that. I was whooped by a guy when we fished on Lake Erie, and I just talked about this on a video. He was dropping a bait vertically down and just letting that thing sit there, and I was working the bait like my uncle and my best friend. I was vertically dropping it, but I was wiggling it and jiggling it, and I was not getting bit until I let that thing absolutely just sit there. So not overworking your bait can be a true key to catching a lot more fish. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this one, and I will see you guys tomorrow.